Impaling him through it and slamming the goblin to the ground, he quickly moved forward. And though he didn't find any enchanted weaponry or other items, he did find things that would come in use later on. Gemstones and gold were always welcome. As well as a healer's kit, another thing that would greatly come in handy. He wasn't quite at the point of needing it just yet, but he certainly would if any more of those elite goblins showed up. Dealing with captains that would help encourage the troops were not something he had intended to look forward to. Once more waiting at the doorway, he waited for the final wave of these goblins to come forward. And single skeleton. Every swing of the axe that nicked him slightly was a curse under his breath. He wasn't sure if he'd gotten rusty, or perhaps he was not as skilled as he had initially assumed. It was possible. After all, he would only dealt with individuals on the open sea, and battle on the sea was much different from battling on land. Finally cutting them down, Angelo was reminded of yet another tough goblin. They weren't quite as potent as the elite that he had just dealt with. Even with their strongest attack, it didn't appear to do much to his skin. However, he was also fully aware that if one of the beasts got to his eyes, even he would be in trouble. Keeping his guard up, he quickly made work of them, cutting them down. It was odd that these goblins appeared to be carrying enchanted arrows, and yet they had no bows. Questions for later. Perhaps the bows had been broken? That didn't seem right either. Who could really try to analyze the mind of a goblin, though? Having cleared the tunnel and ensured Pavel's safety, at least immediate safety, he would slip into the next door, expecting to find more goblins. Instead, he found an old man. Oh, well, this is another mostly out of character thing. I intended to help you grow in skill, but it seems I have nothing I could actually teach you, Angelo. I am too old to go with you, but the south door is now open for you. Beyond you will find chambers leading to the water Davian creatures, if the attackers have not taken them already. Confused on why the door had been barricaded, perhaps because the threats had just been that potent, and yet the one near him had not been. He instead moved toward the corner, hoping that he would have the time to fall into a slumber. Unfortunately, it was not the case. A short nap would have done him good. Not nap, rest. He wouldn't nap at a time like this. Definitely still sick. Wandering forward quickly, Angelo would move towards the small library to the side, hoping to find some books and scrolls, and he did just that. Several spells that would be of use. If only he could recall some of the old teachings he'd gotten from Van Gaal. As the door opened, seemingly on its own, the man glanced back at the older fellow, Gildar, wondering briefly if the man was a mage. Perhaps after he'd cleared this room, he would be able to take a short break and recover his breath, and possibly patch himself up. Carefully opening the door, drawing his crossbow, and trying to get a lucky shot off, he managed it. Once more holding them at the door to minimize the threat, Angelo would quickly cut down those before him. He had to be careful. If he let any slip through, then the old man, if he was as frail as he said he was, could be in quite the trouble. Still, thankfully, there was no elites in this room. It was just more goblins, and though a couple were armed, they were no threat. Another healer's kit, something that would definitely come in handy if he truly could not find a place to take a short break. He needed to catch his breath and recover his flames. Pulling open one of the chests, he glanced at the center, noting the pool. Perhaps this had been one of the rooms for the priests, the instructors to study. The armor seemed to prove such. He could not risk being weighed down by such a thing just yet. Perhaps once this was all done, he would come back for it. It could sell for a pretty penny. Belladonna root. An incredibly rare plant that could come in handy, though not in this scenario. Similarly, the maps would be of use once he escaped this place. Ale and spirits, and food, a storage shed, as one would expect. Storage room. Quickly moving forward, he would move past the door, find a glance to make sure he hadn't missed anything before slipping into the shadows once more. If he could clear the halls, he would feel safe in taking a short breather. And that would be key for him to progress. He needed to be able to summon his flames once more to cover his weapons if he was going to be dealing with more elites. And he had a feeling the closer he got to the center, and likely the end of this, the more he was going to need those flames of his to survive properly. Quickly falling back, sliding into the shadows as best he could, he silently cursed the glow of the gem on his ring. Though it was certainly useful to some, he was sure. Closing the door behind him, he couldn't help but wonder if there was something he could do about it. Perhaps a slab of leather. That could help. After all, the light came from the gemstone, and so, falling down to sit for a moment and catch his breath, he would quickly bandage his wounds as best he could, halting what little bleeding he had from numerous small wounds, and sliding a leather band off his armor and instead over the ring itself. This way, the magical enchantments would still remain, but hopefully, he would not be as easily detected while in stealth. The shadows were his friend, after all. Slipping from them to clear the distance more quickly, before sliding right back into them, he cursed the lights along the sides. He understood the logic. After all, they needed to light the halls, but why couldn't the damned goblins have knocked them over? Sadly, if he tried to do it now, it was likely that due to them being stone and sealed in place, it would cause more trouble for him than not. And here he would stop and listen, because inside he heard it, the clanking of bones, and more importantly, of armor. Skeletons in armor. Absolutely lovely. That was not something he could deal with easily. And so, quietly thanking the fact that he had recovered his breath, he would whisper, summoning the flames once more to coat his weapon. With a breath, they engulfed it, and then, slipping once more into the shadows, and taking a breath, he would pause. Gotta do a save here. When I redid this, I wanted to make sure that it was still a challenge since I'd given him a higher level. Taking a breath, he pushed the door open and held his stance. He was sure they'd notice him, and soon they did. Cutting them down one at a time, and cursing the damned door. The doorway was welcome, the door itself was a hindrance. And he saw it, a skeleton warrior. Someone that was quite skilled in something he could not afford to allow to get any free shots on him. The armor deflected the blade, but the heat served its purpose, and then he took a powerful blow from the axe, cursing the damned creature, and quickly cutting it down. However, he'd suffered a mortal wound. The damage was not light, and quickly he was forced to take a potion in order to make sure he wasn't cut down by the second. Even his hide could not protect him from whatever that skeleton had been wielding, infused with far more magic. Perhaps it had been one of the head instructors for the warriors. Urban? No. He doubted that man would be all the way out here. Releasing a breath, realizing he had just, in a way, said that the man would have been a fight, shaking his head, Angelo quickly moved forward, He could feel the blood dripping from it. The potion had certainly helped, the enchantment sealing the wound, but he needed more. Quickly pulling out one of the kits he'd acquired and applying the bandages to the wounded area, stitching his wound closed. His years on the sea definitely came in handy here. There'd been plenty of times when he'd been bitten by a shark or worse, and needed to stitch the wound up or die. Gathering the lightest of the items found on the body and moving forward, thinking that man, coated in armor, had been raised. A quick dash through to gather what supplies he could. He couldn't dilly-dally and try to grab all the armor and everything worth money. He would have to wait. Anything light or useful could be taken. Otherwise, it would just simply have to wait its turn. Dashing over the piles of bones and moving forward, Angelo winced occasionally, feeling the stitches pull. He would most definitely need some bed rest after this. Unfortunately, one of the doors was already open. Doing what he could, he charged them. Blade engulfed in flames, he was determined to use it to its maximum potential as much as he could. Unfortunately, there was nothing significantly dangerous in this room. Once more cutting down the goblins one after the other. He had to okay, I thought he did damage. I was confused for a moment. As the scent of burning goblin flesh filled his nose, he had to make a face. The beast never smelled particularly good, but they certainly smelled worse now. Roasting flesh was never a pleasant smell. Well, unless it was a boar.